Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, if you say so. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Monday, May 23rd, 2022. As I note in the morning's post, happy Victoria Day, a victorious Victoria Day to our friends in Canada. I had to go look that one up just to figure out exactly what it was. I mean, it was relatively self-explanatory. I mean, I know who Victoria was, but didn't know what you would do with the day, I guess, in this day and age. I mean, she's kind of long gone. So what was the deal? All right, well, I don't know. I don't know why they chose to celebrate it versus any other sovereign, but I guess if you keep your sovereign, then, you know, a personal sovereign, then it makes more sense than it does here in America. But what I found most relatable about the very existence of Victoria Day, which I learned about thanks to the NAFTA refrigerator calendar, as usual, is that it is the unofficial, or maybe even official, who knows, kickoff of the summer season in Canada. So happy summer to those of you listening in Canada. I would like to know how you get your summer kickoff before we do. I mean, wouldn't it take longer to become summer? I don't know. Maybe now is summer because it's only a week's difference. We do that on Memorial Day. I don't know if you guys do the mattress sale thing for Victoria Day, but if so, happy Victoria Day and good luck to you with your mattress shopping. I don't know why we do it. We do, I mean, I know why we're supposed to be doing Memorial Day. I know what we've turned it into, and it's not much often to do with memorials, but at any rate, it's a day off, and everyone likes having one of those. So happy Victoria Day, Canadian folks. And today I'll be spelling everything with an extra U, including Greg Dworkin, who will join us later. I found a way to work an extra U into his name just to make sure that it was understood in Canada that he would be with us later on. The Kagro, this is Canadian speak. The Canadian in the Morning radio show. Why not? Live now. Gosh, Bill's almost all the way to Canada as it is, being in Portland, Maine. I mean, it's the southern part of Maine, but, you know, Maine. So it's almost Canada to someone like me. Well, the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. And, hey, what's this about Canadian Victoria Day? What's it all about? Well, pull up a plate of poutine, not Putin, but poutine. They do spell it the same way. And, well, Kagro X will tell you all about it. Spoiler, it celebrates William Shatner and Martin Short and no one else. That would be rather sad. Oh, I should have grabbed this thing last night. I was intrigued by it in Pocket. There was a Pocket suggestion. Did you know that they made such things? That suggested stories you might like to read. And there's really no reason why it should have been suggested, quite honestly. Except, I don't know, maybe they listen to the show and they know I could be distracted by anything. But it's gone now. But there was a suggestion of an article about a, I guess, miraculous, in some respects, production of Godspell, like in the early 70s, a Canadian production of Godspell that featured what would eventually become an all-star comedic cast. I guess, sounds like maybe they met one another at the Godspell production and decided to start working together and maybe jumped into the Second City thing together. But like Martin Short, since he was mentioned in the tweet here, and Eugene Levy and a number of others, and I didn't open the article to see how many other comedic acting legends, Canadian comedic acting legends, were in this one production. But it sounded like it was enough to produce an article, but just not enough to get me to click on it. So it was let's say probably, as opposed to say 7 modern mega stars, there might have been only 5, and that's why I didn't click. And you got to get the numbers up in order to get me to click. But it was a busy time, and I let it go, and I could probably look it up, and maybe you guys already know it, or everybody knew it, and it was old news, and I'm the last one to find out. Who knows? All right. Well, I just thought we'd start out that way. Oh, and I haven't clicked on all the other things I'm supposed to have open, like Pocket, and that's why I'm rambling. But luckily, there is some organization out there somewhere. Greg Dworkin has got a raft of stories ready to go. We'll catch up on all the things that happened over the weekend. I had my mind erased this morning when I learned a very new and weird detail. I guess somebody has been tracking all the various school board screamers around the country, and one of them caught my eye because they happened to find out, I think from Las Vegas, one particularly screechy woman who's very annoying and who's very vivid in her accusations of sexual abuse of school children, she claims, I guess under the Las Vegas school system, or really just anywhere in the country, who knows. Anyway, as it turns out, her husband's Facebook stream, or whatever the hell you would call the thing, is full of his own images of his collection of Nazi tattoos and other paraphernalia, so that's kind of weird. I guess he's a biker, and that stuff kind of goes hand in hand, which is kind of weird and sad, and I'm sure that there are lots of bikers who don't want that to be the perception of themselves or other bikers, but what can you do? Too late. They've ruined it for everyone. I thought interesting among the pictures that they decided to include, or he decided to include, I don't know how much choice she had in the matter, was one of them, I don't know, headed upstairs, perhaps at home, and he was showing off all of his tattoos and doing that okay white power type sign, which they keep denying has anything to do with anything. But I thought it was interesting that she had chosen to dress up on her way upstairs in her, provocative, Catholic schoolgirl style costume, which, people do and whatever, and that's not my issue with them. But I did think it was kind of odd that sort of by day you are trolling and screaming at school boards. There's our friends calling early in the morning. I guess the bill collectors just never leave Greg alone first thing in the morning. Anyway, that gives me a chance to tell you about these weirdos. I just thought it was odd that you would spend your days screaming about these elaborate fantasies of childhood sexual abuse in the school setting in particular, and think that everybody has to hear you about that. And then by night, that's actually your sexual fantasy. And I thought that was kind of an odd combination, and it made me wonder about how much of that is going on. And hopefully it's only this one set of weirdos, but I don't know. I never gave any consideration to the, I guess, distinct possibility that this isn't about public policy for everyone. At least for some people, it might just be a part of their elaborate cosplay sex life, and this is just part of their gratification, is screaming at school boards, which just is foreign as a concept to me, but I suppose it's possible. And then I got to wondering, what if that's what Chris Rufo is really all about? What if secretly that's his motivation and all this? I don't need to change the way school's taught in this country, or I don't even need to leverage this for Republican power. This is just secretly part of the way I live my life, and the private gratification that comes from it is why I do it. And I think that's an odd thought too. But then again, we've fought wars over such things in the past, so I guess it's just possible. But what a weird thing it would be if it, at least for some people, if we were treating it like a serious policy discussion, even though we try not to treat those people seriously when they come and scream at the school board. If we're bending over backwards to try to accommodate what might be the reasonable fears of some portion of this group, but it was really all just being driven by personal gratification as opposed to serious. What a weird idea that would be.
Well, welcome to TMI in the morning with David Waldman.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it. There's nothing wrong. If you want to scream at school boards, I wish you wouldn't. There is something wrong with making up accusations, certainly, but venting yourself at school boards by itself is not particularly troublesome. And doing what you want at home is not particularly troublesome. But the combination of it, reveals the possibility that, well, at the very least, we can come away and say they're not arguing in good faith.
You're welcome to do what you want to do at home.
Yes.
Don't do it at the school board meeting.
Well,
please.
Certainly true, and they've managed to separate the two. But I guess what all it really comes down to is the part that's not news to anybody now is they're not arguing necessarily in good faith when they come to the school board and scream. So remember that.
They ought to be identified as like, oh, yes, and by the way, I actually do have a child in the school system here.
Yeah, and when they don't.
And when they don't, they're obviously not arguing in good faith. So there's two things that come to mind as you describe school boards. One is the fact that although the political environment for Democrats is bleak, and the polls are terrible, and the prognostication is awful. On the other hand, the school board elections around the country didn't seem to go all that bad for Democrats. A lot of those screamers lost, so that's good news.
Yes, I was happy.
And if you're going to talk about sexual abuse and secrets, why don't you start with the Southern Baptist Convention?
You could well have done that, or I rather could well have done that, because that's actually in the news and reported versus just guessing.
Southern Baptist leaders covered up sex abuse, kept secret database report says. This was from the Washington Post, but the actual breakout story, I believe, was from the Houston Chronicle, which was doing their own investigative work, and I want to give credit where credit is due. I don't have a subscription to that, so I can't get the story there. But Southern Baptist leaders covered up sex abuse, kept secret database. Among the findings of a previously unknown case of a pastor who is credibly accused of assaulting a woman a month after leaving the presidency of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh.
So, as they say in the movies, it goes all the way to the top.
Yes. Well, the more we report on stories like this, the more you learn that is apparently the route to the top. Or if you're already en route to the top, that's the way you stay en route to the top, is cover up the problems that would ordinarily topple you on your way.
Right. So. Now, here's, tell me what's more shocking. The fact that it happened, or the fact that this is the first investigation of its kind in a massive Protestant denomination like the SBC is expected to send shockwaves throughout a conservative Christian community that's had intense internal battles over how to handle sex abuse.
Like not more of it or less of it?
Church.
Okay.
The 13 million member denomination, along with other religious institutions in the U.S., has struggled with declining membership for the past 15 years. Its leaders have long resisted comparisons between its sexual abuse crisis and that of the Catholic Church. Oh, dear, I made that comparison, didn't I?
They have long
saying that total number of abuse cases was small. What's the definition of small? Well, less than 1 million.
The other person has it.
More people died of COVID.
Yeah, right, sure, of course. Yeah, I don't know. What would be more shocking? Probably, I don't know. That's the first investigation, I guess.
They covered up all the investigations. They declined to look into it when women complained specifically about this issue or that issue and asked for apology.
Right.
Database to track it, something to make sure it didn't happen again. They said they couldn't. It was impossible. Their structure didn't allow it. They don't have a pope. Everybody's sort of semi-independent. You can't expect each individual church and congregation to do it just because leadership says so, because it's so decentralized. So, it's not up to us. It's not our fault. And, of course, in secret, they did keep a database, and they had a pretty good idea what was going on, and everything they told the women who were bringing up the complaints were lies.
The only reason I know anything about them in the news at all is that they have annual conventions. That's structure enough for me. I think you can get a database once you have a national convention.
Yeah. While stories of abuse were minimized, said this story, and survivors were ignored or even vilified, revelations came to light in recent years that some senior SBC leaders have protected or even supported alleged abusers, the report states.
What? Well, sounds familiar. That's for sure.
Right. So that's a big deal, and that's certainly going to have ramifications. And, not a hard segue to go from there to this piece by Sam Perry and Philip Gorski, who are sociologists that follow this sort of thing. Outlook piece in the Washington Post: with the Buffalo Massacre, white Christian nationalism strikes again. Yes. A toxic ideology is increasingly overlapping with mainstream views. While white Christian nationalism can be messy to define, but it's critical to recognize its three animating impulses: freedom, order, and violence.
Freedom. Questionable freedom, but okay.
Yeah.
The others seem
The
pretty
ideology is Holy Trinity. The freedom belongs only to Americans, these nationalists see us like them, which is to say white men.
Right.
The order is to be imposed on all those who aren't and don't. And righteous violence is to be deployed as necessary to achieve this twisted vision. Both the racist massacre in Buffalo last weekend and the anti-abortion legislation spreading rapidly through the states are linked to white Christian nationalism despite a pair of glaring paradoxes. The suspect in the Buffalo shooting doesn't claim to be Christian in a religious sense, and many pro-life Christians are pro-death penalty, pro-gun, and pro-police brutality. Sure. So it makes sense in context because the ideology's adherents are committed to instituting an ethnoculture that represents a shrinking minority, a traditionalist Christian social order in which the freedoms of white Christians are privileged. There is a world where race, religion, and national belonging have become virtually inseparable and are not necessarily tied to spirituality, and the spread of this kind of thinking is rapid and startling. Over the last year or so, white Christian nationalism has become intertwined with the Great Replacement theory, which holds that a corrupt elite made up of Jews and Democrats is carrying out a plot to replace real Americans by engineering mass immigration from the Third World. Since 2015, that theory has captured the fringes in some of the mainstream, from angry young men bearing tiki torches in Charlottesville to pundits like Ann Coulter, Charlie Kirk, Matt Walsh, and Tucker Carlson, to at least a half a dozen prominent Republican candidates, including Ron Johnson, Elise Stefanik, and Scott Perry, Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers, and J.D. Vance. Inciting the Great Replacement in a lengthy document posted online, the Buffalo suspect, whose name I will note to you goes unspoken, appears to have justified plans for his murderous assault by articulating what many of his fellow citizens already believe. If there's one thing I want you to get from these writings, it's that white birth rates must change. Combined with a menacing invasion of not-white immigrants, low white fertility rates, he warns, will ultimately result in the complete racial and cultural replacement of whites. So I'm kind of surprised the Supreme Court said that birth control isn't appropriate for white people, but it's highly recommended and will be sent to all non-white people's homes. I mean, it's getting to be that, and just striking that nobody has gone there yet. But maybe that's next month. According to a recent survey by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, a third of all American adults now embrace the idea that an effort is underway to replace U.S.-born Americans with immigrants for electoral gain, even if they wouldn't shoot up a grocery store in its furtherance. That American implies Christian is not an uncommon belief, especially if you're a white American. In a nationally representative survey, we feel that in March we found that 28% of all whites and half of conservative whites affirm that being Christian is very important to being truly American. For many white Americans, Christianity is more of an ethnic culture and identity than a set of spiritual beliefs. It means white people like us. So I will add parenthetically, 28% sounds like a lot. It is a lot. 23, 24% of Americans felt like Nixon shouldn't have resigned back in Watergate. There's always been a quarter or so of the population, which is absolutely deplorable and irredeemable. Yes. That's been true forever. And in so many areas, the reason that they have outsized influence is because so many other people who don't agree with those ideas don't vote.
Yeah, well, they tend not to vote when the 25% don't mean anything, when they lose and they're already being outvoted. But then by the time they're not any longer being outvoted, it's like a little late to get to the polls. So turnout, always.
Always for everything, including school board elections.
It doesn't.
And The Flag and the Cross, our new book on white Christian nationalism, which we have both been studying for some time, we show that the Holy Trinity embodied in it is anchored in a mythological version of American history that goes something like this. America was founded as a Christian nation. The founders were traditional Christians. The founding documents are biblically based. God's bestowed immense wealth and power in America and given it a mission to spread freedom and religion, but that mission and those blessings are now threatened by the presence of non-whites, non-Christians, and non-native-born people on American soil. Today, this story is propagated by a veritable Christian nationalist industry that includes radio stations, video series, scores of books, and entire organizations dedicated to telling white conservative Christians that the nation is their birthright. There are those who, in fact, never accepted losing the Civil War.
Right. Well,
and that's their base. For a segment of Christians, the battle over abortion is just one front in a wider war to make America Christian again by any means necessary. And they're not so much pro-life as they are pro-control.
All right,
pretty good piece.
better.
I think it
that's a better
highlights a lot of
description.
the issues here. And it's important to note that white Christian nationalism is not the same as conservative white evangelicalism. Southern Baptist Convention is white conservative evangelicalism. Some evangelicals reject the ideology, and many non-evangelicals and even some non-Christians embrace it. Like see the Buffalo guy.
Yeah.
In our
That's
book,
true.
we show that 20% of Americans who believe the federal government should declare the nation Christian don't even identify as Christian. And that aligns with the Buffalo guy, this piece says.
Yeah.
A view that aligns with the Buffalo suspect's view of Christianity. Answering his own question about whether he thought of himself as a Christian, he wrote, "No, I do not ask God for salvation by faith. I don't confess my sins, but I believe in and practice many Christian values," which is to say, I'm white.
Yeah, I don't know what any of them are, but okay. Well, that's interesting. It also aligns with the views of one of the major candidates for the governorship of Georgia at the moment, insisting that we've all had it all wrong on the separation of church and state. And that's not what the founders meant. They just meant they were going to wait for us to do it.
Which candidate's that?
Oh, what's her name? I can't even remember. The one with the Babies, Guns, Jesus bus.
Oh.
Candace
okay.
something with two K and two S's. So
She's still a contender?
yeah, she's fading as people line up between one or the other of the other two candidates that are going to destroy Georgia. But she's still there, and she's still making videos and still passing around, and they're shocking because she says things like, there shouldn't be any separation of church and state. We are the church, and this church runs Georgia. Okay, well, I mean, that's a bad speech, but that gets noticed on social media.
Right. This
She's
is
the one that looks
sort
like
of
the
a
comedian
corollary
who's
to this
imitating
because, the worldview is so entwined with political power. It's hard to separate. Joshua Benton is a senior writer at the Nieman Lab at Harvard, writes about digital journalism and a bunch of other things. So the Wall Street Journal had this piece extolling the Highland Park High School in Dallas, which is just a wonderful school with great teachers. And look at all these Super Bowl and athletes, other athletes besides football that they've produced. Scotty Scheffler, Max Stafford, Clayton Kershaw. It's a wonderful school, and they just turn out these remarkable student athletes. And Joshua Benton said, "I'm not sure how you write a story about how great the schools in Highland Park, Texas are without noting that they exist entirely to allow rich white Dallasites to maintain Jim Crow-style segregation."
All right.
Here's a map of the Dallas Independent School District. See the white hole in the middle labeled University Park and Highland Park? Those are called park cities, and they make up Highland Park Independent School District. It's very white. Dallas ISD students are 69.9% Hispanic and 21.4% black. Highland Park ISD students are 6% Hispanic and 0.8% black. 85% of Dallas students qualify for free reduced lunch, but 0.2% of Highland Park students do. None of this is accidental. Rich white people have zealously guarded the enclave they built for themselves for many decades. When the town was planned in 1913, it required all property owners to have a deed come in and saying, "shall be used for residence purposes only and by white persons only, not excluding bona fide servants of any race."
Thanks.
That's what the deed covenant says. But what if those live-in servants had kids of their own? Highland Park taxpayers literally paid Dallas schools to take its black residents off their hands in the 60s.
Phew. Man.
The years after Brown
takes
v.
planning.
Board of Education were spent trying to figure out how to avoid getting sued and forced to educate black kids. Dallas eventually stopped taking it. An alderman, a recent president of the Dallas Bar Association, asked residents to fire all their black servants so the town could avoid the issue.
Yeah, well, no longer a problem. But
Right. And then he
Everyone
gives
fire all your
newspaper proof of this. Another alderman suggested ethnic cleansing, that all Negroes be moved out of Highland Park, but somebody noticed that that's illegal, so they didn't do that. This is in the 60s. In
Now they can do
69,
it.
when the town worried that some of its around 50 black children, again, the kids of live-in servants, might try to enroll, it banned all kitchens and servants' quarters. So they wanted to starve them out.
Wait a minute. So, but how did they get around that hurting the white people?
I don't know. Well, there's one Highland Park family who didn't want to give up their live-in maid, so she kindly rented an empty apartment within Dallas district boundaries so her maid's kids could pretend to live there.
That's adorable.
Right? Highland Park didn't get its first black student until 1974.
Wow.
They never even had to set up separate but equal school systems because they didn't have any black students.
They just banned having them. Well, that's a fascinating thing, and it's interesting that back in the day, they worried about things like, well, you can't just, constitutionally, you can't just ban all non-white people from this town. Whereas now, I think they're probably thinking maybe you could.
Yeah, maybe you can, because like the Supreme Court says you can do whatever you want as long as it's in favor of white people.
Right. Back then, we had liberals on the Supreme Court. Yuck.
So you think, oh my gosh, 1960, that's like ancient history. Only old people like me remember 1960. Well, as of 1980, that guy that I was telling you about was the only black graduate in Highland Park history.
Well, yeah.
1980, if you remember. It wasn't that long ago.
Sure, kids have 1980s nostalgia parties all the time. Remember that? Okay.
Right,
well.
And H.P. Sr. in the story that was written up in Texas Monthly, Highland Park Sr. said, I think it's real scary to go to school with blacks. I'm glad I don't have to.
Oh, my goodness. Well, they certainly feel comfortable stating it aloud. That's
right. The writer, H.P. kids see people of different races not as fellow students but as servants, people who provide convenience and comfort for them, who aim to please. Highland Park didn't have a single black homeowner until 2003. Surely you can remember 2003. It wasn't that long ago.
Starts with a 20. Everybody can remember.
And so the whole point is if you're going to extol Highland Park as being just a wonderful place that produces football players, why don't you talk about the rest of Highland Park's history?
I don't know. And when are they going to get kids used to the reality of what it's like to play football outside of Highland Park? Because, there's actually quite a few kids of different races in the game. I don't know if they've noticed that.
I'm going to send you the image of the district and how it's carved out.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Hi, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on after learning these disturbing facts about Highland Park, Texas, which I guess they should have called Dallas. The TV series just should have been called Highland Park instead, because I guess those are the people they're talking about. I don't know. This is a very odd view of Dallas, but eye-opening. I didn't spend any time ever thinking about Highland Park and how great the high school was because of the sports figures, but surely I totally believe that there are people who have been extolling the high school system without thinking about its segregation policies. But so interesting, and I wouldn't have been able to hear about it from the Wall Street Journal without your help, Greg.
Well, without Joshua Benton and Neiman Labs who helped put that together. The other piece of domestic politics I think we should certainly mention is the fact that we still don't know who won the Senate primary in Pennsylvania.
Oz.
This is a piece from Politico. McCormick and Oz joust over counting of undated ballots.
Undated.
Interesting piece here from a process point of view.
No one will date them.
A federal court judgment in a related vote counting case bolsters McCormick's standing in the too close to call race. Right now, Oz has about like 1,000 vote lead with something like 8,000 votes still to count. Pennsylvania's too close to call, but McCormick's been doing better on mail-ins, so that's why it's too close to call. Pennsylvania's too close to call GOP Senate race is being rocked by an obscure court case. In a letter first obtained by Politico, David McCormick's campaign wrote to the state's counties this past Friday, today being Monday, and argued that they should count mail-in and absentee ballots that were submitted without dates on their envelopes.
No, that's fraud.
The McCormick team cited a judgment from a 3-judge panel on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals that had been issued hours earlier this same Friday. It found that hundreds of undated mail-in and absentee ballots that were received on time but were undated should be tallied in a 2021 county judgeship election.
Yes.
Oz is leading McCormick by 1,100 votes, or 0.1 percentage points. The primary is expected to go to a recount. Election officials have said they should have a good idea by Tuesday, by tomorrow. If there will be a recount, the state's chief election official must formally make that decision by Thursday, so we have to know what's going on this week.
When they say must, don't forget
we must.
You don't have to. You can
we
just
have
not.
To. And outstanding mail-in and absentee ballots have been tallied. As they have been tallied, McCormick, who's outperforming Oz in such ballots, has gained some ground. On Friday, states said there were approximately 8,300 Republican mail-in and absentee ballots left to count. The number doesn't include any undated ballots, and there's still uncertainty in the state of how far the circuit court's decision will extend beyond 2021. But the whole point here is you have a close race. Mail-in ballots are the difference. Whether this ballot or that ballot counts, count all the votes. The mantra back at 2000 is certainly not being set here. Oz is the one that doesn't want the votes counted.
Stop the
you
count.
have the Republicans on one side, including Trump and Oz, wanting to simply stop counting and declare a winner. And you have McCormick and the others saying, no, you have to count every vote. And the point, obviously, is that it puts a complete lie to everything that the Republicans have said about the 2020 election, because it's pretty clear that, you have to be patient and just wait for the process to work. You can't count votes quickly in Pennsylvania, and that's simply not only the law but standard practice, and there's nothing nefarious about it unless it's a Democrat. But if it's a Republican, it's all perfectly legitimate. Stop complaining.
Yeah, exactly. So, something. Yeah, you can take no lesson from it except that the lesson is never take any lesson from Republicans. Just don't listen to it. It's garbage, top to bottom. And of course, if they do eventually count all those votes and McCormick wins, then he runs on a platform of don't count anybody else's votes in anything.
Yeah, Ellen Lyon, the Department of State's spokesperson, that's Lyon, not Lying. Ellen Lyon,
yes,
the Department of State's spokesperson, said it would issue guidance to counties on the impact of the federal court order. She said the agency was pleased with the court's interpretation, signaling it would likely tell counties to tally the undated ballots. Yes. So again, a reminder, should Doug Mastriano win the governorship, he's likely to replace all of these people who insisted that ballots be counted.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm not familiar with the intricacies of Pennsylvania law, but apparently the Pennsylvania governor appoints the Secretary of State there, different than other places where they're elected.
Right. There's some difference between the states and commonwealths.
Well, the point is that if Mastriano is the governor and he's a white Christian nationalist, election denier, big lie guy, yes, then so will his Secretary of State.
Yes, which I guess really the only prediction we really should make is that they'll count the ballots the way Mastriano wants the ballots counted. If it turns out that counting the late or undated mail-in ballots will be
they'll do it Georgia style.
Trump.
Whatever helps Brian Kemp is the way they'll do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, we should note that that's the case and watch them do it. We won't be shocked. So, that's pretty. I don't know what to tell you. It's funny. It couldn't play out better than in a Republican primary for both. And by the way, both candidates will campaign on the same platform that you should deal with votes however I tell you next time to deal with the votes. That's the Republican platform, is that if I win and I get to call the shots, I promise to call the shots in a way that prevents anyone else from calling shots. That's it.
The Philadelphia Inquirer notes that neither Oz nor McCormick is complaining about how the votes are being counted at this particular point in time.
Yeah, they don't know whether it'll help them or hurt them and what they're going to have to advocate in 24.
Right, they don't know what to say because they don't know whether they won or not. And that completely determines whether or not this is a legitimate process.
Yes, which is, of course, what makes it an illegitimate process. But okay. Sure. Well, very interesting to watch. You and I and the listeners will take notice of it. Somehow the rest of the country won't. Pennsylvania certainly won't.
We'll see.
They're all just distracted
if
by
Mastriano
the
loses
fact that the guy's
bigly,
name is Oz.
then they did take this into account. But we'll see.
Right, yes. We might give them a chance to vote. Okay, let's do that.
Let's do that. And the last piece on the domestic side, at least that's pure politics, is simply to note that tomorrow's the Georgia primary.
Yes, Tuesday.
And
right.
Of the three races, which do you think is the most interesting? There's the governor, the Secretary of State, and Senate. On the Republican side, all of which are interesting for various reasons. Which do you think is the most interesting?
The most interesting on the Republican side is the governor's race.
Well,
Senate
certainly
race?
The fact that Kemp's going to win
like
and Trump's going to lose is sort of interest to me.
Okay.
And the fact that Herschel
answer?
Walker is a complete nut job, but he plays football, so he might win,
right,
is notable, but
what does
to
he
me
think
not
about
especially interesting.
Yeah.
But the fact that Brad Raffensperger may actually beat Jody Heiss, and Jody Heiss is a stop-the-steal guy, and he's Secretary of State, and he'll determine how the ballots will be counted.
Okay.
That, to me, is like the race to watch.
I was thinking about that one, but then I had heard, well, it sounds like Jody Heiss is losing pretty badly, so maybe that's not the most interesting, but we can be interested in it here.
Well, Raffensperger's race with Heiss is certainly closer than Kemp and Perdue.
Okay.
And it's probably closer than Herschel Walker against the world.
Could be. I would like to. Can we get a reporter to ask Herschel Walker about Highland Park High School?
I suppose.
Curious what he might say about that.
Turning to the international field, I should note Australian voters threw out Scott Morrison, the Conservative. Blimey. For the first time in 10 years, the Conservatives lost. And, what can you say about it? Scott Morrison was a really disliked bull in a china shop kind of guy.
Well, all right.
Like France, Australia has both parties that take turns being in power, and the voters hate both. Mm-hmm. So they don't mind going from one to the other. But Macron was really happy because he thought that Scott Morrison screwed France on that submarine deal.
Oh, yeah.
And they're still pissed about that. But the best piece that I read, I have this in the Pundit Roundup. I'll send it to you. It's very short. But the Australians have a onion-style paper called The Chaser.
Oh.
And the way they covered the election is breaking. Rupert Murdoch has lost the Australian election. Australia has celebrated its first change of leadership in 50 years after a man who wasn't sucking up to Murdoch was elected to government in a major upset.
Ta-da. Okay.
Murdoch gave a concession speech late tonight, thanking his opponent, Reality, and pledging to do everything he can to win back Middle Australia.
Okay. Middle Australia.
Yeah, pretty funny.
Yeah, it's an interesting term.
Whether it takes me calling the new guy a communist, publishing nude women in my newspapers again, or just straight up broadcasting neo-Nazis in national primetime, I'm going to do anything to ensure I'm back at the next election, said Murdoch.
Well, yeah, how many years till their next election? Although, well, the parliamentary system, does that mean it could happen any time kind of thing?
I don't know. I think you have to have a couple of weeks of the new guy in power before you go and have a new election.
I guess so. I was just sort of trying to think of, will Rupert Murdoch live to the next election?
I don't know.
Realistically.
On the Russo-Ukrainian front,
yes.
There's and Marcos published this when he did his Ukrainian update.
Yeah.
But there's a song by the Ukrainian soldiers making the rounds, which is extolling the virtues of that Turkish loitering munitions drone, which is really very catchy. So if you listen to it, it's kind of hard to get out of your head.
Huh. Well, I will have to try and do that. Do they have copyright in Ukraine? Can we just play it?
I don't know.
They're busy with other things. We might get away with this.
Yeah, but it's easy enough to find. So.
Oh, okay. Well,
I'll get it to you.
Here it is. To hear it. Okay, because
once you hear it, it's kind of tough to get it out of your head.
Is it in Ukrainian?
Yeah.
That's good because sometimes, like songs that become popular among soldiers during wartime.
The chorus is the Turkish drone, so it's really, and then it's in the backdrop of them dancing and showing Russian destroyed tanks. So you get an idea what.
That sounds fun, but I don't even know that. I don't know if I know the story of the Turkish drone. What loitering Turkish drone?
Oh, a lot of the damage done to the Russian equipment has been through this Turkish drone. The Bayraktar.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
So it's cheap, it's easy, and it hovers looking for a target. That's why it's loiters.
I see.
And then when it finds a target, it drops either suicides in or drops something on it, and it's taken out quite a number of Russian tanks and artillery, to the point where, as Turkey starts to argue about whether or not Finland and Sweden should be allowed in NATO, because after all, they're not as sympathetic to wiping out Kurds as Turkey is.
Yeah.
One of the ways around this is places like Poland and Estonia are now making their way to Turkey to see if they can make deals with Erdogan and the Turks on purchasing these drones.
Yeah.
So the U.S. is encouraging a little business to pull Turkey back into the NATO sphere.
All right.
Pay attention to these drones. Pay attention to the song. It's really catchy.
Their own developed drone, huh? Well,
it's a Turkish drone. Yeah, it's very, very popular around the world now.
It looks like it. Yeah. I just looked it up. I hadn't heard much about it, but it seems to be doing wonders for them. Okay, and I'll have to listen to the song at some point.
Meanwhile, Russia's counselor to the United Nations in Geneva has resigned.
Oh?
His name is Boris Bondarev.
Come on, Boris.
Don't misread that as Boris Badenov, for those of you old enough to remember Rocky and Bullwinkle.
No,
it's
Mr.
Boris Bondarev.
Bondarev, I expect you to resign. I guess we would have to. All right. Boris Bondarev. Yeah. He's out.
Yeah, well,
why?
Why? Because he didn't agree with fearless leader. That's why.
Oh, okay.
Never have I been so ashamed of my country. UN Watch is now calling on all other Russian diplomats at the United Nations and worldwide to follow his moral example and resign. Here's his statement. It's short. My name is Boris Bondarev.
Hi, Boris.
In the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Russia since 2002, since 2019 until now, counselor of the Russian mission to the UN office at Geneva. For 20 years of my career, I've seen different turns of our foreign policy. And this is the too long didn't read version. Those who conceive this war want only one thing: to remain in power, to live in pompous, tasteless palaces, sail on yachts comparable in tonnage and cost to the entire Russian Navy, enjoying unlimited power and complete impunity. To achieve that, they're willing to sacrifice as many lives as it takes. Thousands of Russians and Ukrainians have already died just for this. I regret to admit that over 20 years, I've been involved with this. Minister Lavrov is a good illustration of the degradation of the system over that time. In 18 years, he went from a professional and educated intellectual, whom many of my colleagues held in high esteem, to a person who's constantly broadcasting conflicting statements and threatens the world with nuclear weapons. Today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not about diplomacy. It's about warmongering, lies, and hatred. I studied to be a diplomat. I've been a diplomat for 20 years. The ministry has become my home, my family, but I cannot any longer share in this bloody, witless, and absolutely needless ignominy.
Wow. Well,
ignominy.
I don't know.
Ignominy.
Ignominy?
Stefanik.
Phenomena? Yeah. Well, rest in peace, Mr. Bondarev.
Yeah, don't drink tea and stay away from windows.
This is a test of whether or not Russians will assassinate you in Switzerland.
Yeah, this is the new Russian replacement window policy, which is going to be
it's a good bet,
tested.
Or an interesting bet. But yeah, I don't see how they respect that international law thing. But I guess if you're going to try it from Geneva.
Right.
Wow.
And
Good
then someone who works in Zelensky's office, advisor to the head of the office of President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, says, today, any concession to Russia is not a path to peace, but a war postponed. Ukraine treats neither its sovereignty nor territories and Ukrainians living on them. It's a pity we have to explain such simple things to such reputable media as the New York Times, which had published a editorial, I guess, saying that, we need diplomacy and Ukraine has to think about, how you can help Putin save face.
Right. You should try peas in your guacamole, too.
Right. And the Ukrainians have been pretty clear about this. Macron wants Putin to save face by giving up territory. What part of France is he willing to give up?
Should we pick one?
Well,
we could find one.
Well, it's probably Alsace-Lorraine, because that always goes back and forth.
Right. They're ready to jettison that.
You know.
That's German anyway.
Right. I think that the best way for peace is simply to give Germany the Sudetenland, right? I mean, why don't we just do that? It worked out last time.
Yes, briefly, but what a fantastic moment it was. That would be interesting too, but expand Germany. Since could we make that transition into the worst deaths per capita from COVID internationally? I had somebody
that
notice
would be the U.S. It's hard to beat us.
It is hard to beat us. Well, Peru is number one, but what's interesting is that I found that the rest of the list, the United States has fallen off of the per capita deaths, the per 1 million anyway, and has stayed off the list for some time now. And I had somebody point out that other than Peru, which sits alone at number one, which apparently, I guess they took the lead in recalculating things, I think they thought in a more realistic way, maybe counting more of the excess deaths.
Yeah.
And apparently they thought the rest of the world was going to follow them, and they didn't. It was one of those take one step forward to volunteer things, and everybody
else takes one step back.
Yeah, so they've been sitting at the top, and they just like, all right, that's the way it is now. We'll just leave it. But apparently numbers 2 through 10, somebody points out, I'd been reporting it and not really paying attention to what was it, but they're all contiguous Central and Eastern European nations. So that's kind of interesting, and I don't know what that means necessarily, but it's an opportunity to talk more about the pandemic if you want to.
Well, there's still 1 billion people in the world who haven't gotten vaccinated, so
okay. Some of
them,
I guess,
hard to get rid
Europe.
of the pandemic when there's so many unvaccinated people.
Yes.
Still, vaccines don't completely stop you from getting it. They don't completely stop you from dying from it. The trouble in trying to track those things is that the people who are most likely to get vaccinated and most eligible to get vaccinated are those who are eldest and otherwise most susceptible, immunocompromised, etc. And therefore, it's hard to make too much of statistics like that. But, the pandemic still goes on. The MWRA, that is to say the Massachusetts wastewater tracking. Yes. I sent you a picture of it. Again, you can see the huge spike that happened back in January of 2022, December 2021, January 2022, compared to now.
Right.
Now is almost nothing and dropping.
That's true. Dropping. Okay. Well, anyway, it's true. It's compared to that spike, it's nothing. Although if you look past that spike, all the other times that we thought things were terrible, I guess they really weren't so terrible by comparison to the spike. But we are at the same level as those other previously thought of
Delta,
terrible
but
times.
Omicron was when it first hit, was just awful. And this gives you an idea just how awful it was.
Yeah, that's really the remarkable part. Okay, well,
but the fact that it's declining.
Biobot data, that's interesting.
Yes.
Does that mean that there's some machine counting all this and not a person down there in the sewers? Because that would be an advance.
I think it's a machine,
drone.
Not a person.
Good. Hallelujah.
But the fact that it's going down is good. Yeah. So, we are in the midst of a wave. It's a smaller wave than previous ones, but there's, at least for New England, there's data now suggesting that perhaps it's on the decline, which is pretty good because there's an awful lot of COVID going around Connecticut, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well,
breaking news also in regard to pandemic.
Yeah.
Pfizer-BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine, it looks to be, in terms of their data, successful in children ages 6 months to 5 years. And already the FDA is setting dates as to when they can start debating this. So they'll be in June. June's going to be an interesting month. June is it's a quiet week now for Congress because the House is out of session. Senate's still there, but House is out of session.
Wow.
And in June, we have the public hearings on January 6th. But in June, we'll also have hearings for Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine application in terms of whether or not it'll be approved for 6 months to 5 years, which parents of children that age are quite interested in.
Yes.
There is some movement in terms of baby formula, with some imports now being allowed.
Right.
And, again, a whole bunch of Republicans voted against allowing any help
Any
with
money for
getting more baby formula onto the shelves.
Yeah, I think I saw a military flight of, like one of the big cargo planes full of baby formula landing, and Republicans wanting nothing to do with that, apparently.
Yeah. And I'll just leave you with this thread from John Levy, who is a infectious disease expert, public health guy at BU. And he had given a Zoom talk, and he was wearing a mask, and people were yelling at him. Looks like a KN95 because it's got loops. Although it could be an N95 that you modify yourself. Some people do that because they prefer the loops to the bands over the head.
I've heard this.
So much hostility and confusion from people who saw me on a Zoom wearing a mask in my office this week. Am I crazy? Am I virtue signaling? Am I fear-mongering? Is there some rationale to wear a mask in the office? So let's discuss.
Okay.
Right? An angry critic took a screenshot and sent it to me and said, why are you doing this? And started yelling at me, basically.
Why are you criticizing?
And he said, look, I like to keep my door open. Yeah. My office is right outside the bathrooms. We know this is aerosolized in various and sundry ways. Look at the wastewater stuff from Boston, for example. And so it's just common sense. There's two reasons to wear a mask, to protect me from you and to protect you from me. So there's no reason not to.
Yeah, I honestly, being right outside the bathroom, best thing about this pandemic, mask wearing in public, has been that if I have to go into a public restroom, I already have a mask on, which is always
the question you might ask is, well, is it really worth it? How high is that risk? And what I would say, says John Levy, is the price to pay is very small and the benefit hard to estimate, but high in impact.
Yes.
What price do I pay? The N95 costs me about $0.25 per day of use.
No one's
I use them around 3 times before discarding. We all do that. We don't discard after one use. And pay around 75 cents each. It's really comfortable. I don't notice it most of the time.
Then what's the problem?
Sure, people miss my winning smile, but so what? It isn't virtue signaling, so most people don't see me doing this when I'm in my office doing work. And it isn't fear-mongering. It's a rational decision to do something low cost to protect against a novel virus that can have short-term and long-term effects. And we shouldn't fear COVID, but we shouldn't ignore it either. So am I crazy? Well, that's a different issue. But I think two specific things that do drive me crazy. One is you can't know by looking at somebody if they're immunocompromised, live with somebody who has a young grandson, or has something else that makes them higher risk if they get infected. Does that describe me, he says, as my 8-year-old says, none ya, meaning none of ya business.
That's the real answer.
Right? Nobody should be required to reveal personal and private information about their health or the health of their families. And the second that drives me crazy is the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic. It's already killed 1 million people.
Yeah.
The mockery of mask wearing is connected to a broader public narrative that denies current reality. My guess is people get upset to see a visible sign of the pandemic because you'd like to forget it, which I think is really an important point. It isn't just that people would like to think it's over. They really get annoyed when you remind them that it's not over.
That's the only thing it could possibly be, because the real, the too long didn't read answer to why are you wearing a mask is what's it to you? That's it. Get out of my face. Shut up. I want to. The end. Now I could use it as a teaching moment, which is what he's doing. He's very high-minded. But the answer is, you screenshotted this. You've already wasted too much time on that.
Right.
Without even writing to
what I do is none of your business and go away.
Yeah.
You're blocked.
I mean, that's
the short way to do it.
Because the whole argument, you can't tell me to wear a mask. It's none of your business what I do. Yeah, and then therefore it is. Yeah, exactly. None of your business what I do, but you're.
And it's also none of your business what you do. Everything is my business. Nothing is your business, and that goes back to our original presentation.
Yeah.
The whole idea of white national Christian thought here is that it only applies to white people.
Right.
And it's about us and our power and privilege and freedom. It's the freedom of people like me and people like you people.
Yeah.
As Archie Bunker liked to say.
Yep.
You people are you people, and you people don't have the right to, have the same freedoms that I have because reasons.
Right. Though I can't imagine Archie Bunker screenshotting anything.
Or wearing a mask for that matter.
Oh, that's true. Well, yeah, maybe initially. But yeah, certainly by the end, he'd be a mask protester for sure. But he was elderly and you know what happened. Anyway, well, thank you, Greg. That takes us all the way. Well, it took us well past where we thought we were going to go, as usual, which is perfect.
Well, didn't think we had all that much material, but then again.
Worldwide pandemic will do that to you. It sneaks up on you.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Okay.
Anyway, take care,
Very
and
good,
we'll see if we can get a little more focused on Wednesday instead of the potpourri we had today. And we didn't even do France, except for the fact that Macron needs to give Alsace-Lorraine back to Ukraine.
Right. Well, that's always true. Potpourri, also an excellent solution for having an office right outside of the bathroom.
This is also true.
Okay. Well, we wrapped everything up in that one, so I appreciate it. And we'll continue on. That's the Monday thing, though. I mean, so much happens over the weekend. I don't see how you could approach it in any other way. So I wouldn't feel bad about it. People need a roundup of the weekend.
I'm over it.
Okay. Right. I screenshotted it, and I'm going to yell at you about it later.
Oh, good.
So. Okay.
Well,
great.
as always, thank you for listening to me. And if you didn't like anything I said, yell at David.
All right.
It's his show.
I'm here for you. Excellent. Okay. And now, as we approach the top of the hour break, I have just a minute or so to fill in here. I guess maybe I could, just for fun, because it's always fun to do this, as I mentioned, go back to the countries around the world which have reported the highest rates of death per million inhabitants.
And do you know their flag?
Yeah. Oh,
I don't hear the music. There's supposed to be music.
No, but it comes up in 3 seconds. So there you go. Now you wait. All right. At 9:58:30, our top of the hour music is supposed to come on. Sometimes I'm late. Sometimes I'm on time. Do I know the flags? No, definitely not, because a lot of these are Central and Eastern European countries.
See, it's not just me.
Yeah, they didn't exist back when I actually kind of collected that stuff. But other than Peru, which stands alone, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Georgia, Croatia, Czechia, and Slovakia. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, any number of directions we can go through, go in this stage of the game. Oh, wow. Talking Points Memo is just tweeting up a storm all of a sudden. But more to our interest, Ricky the Kanakistani points out that, I guess, with respect to Victoria Day, I like my sovereign, and it's not just Victoria. I guess I read, and who knows how accurate these things are, or whether it's the same understanding that the average Canadians have of Victoria Day, but it has become kind of an official celebration of the continued liking of the sovereigns. And they were not all born on the same day, just Victoria in this case, but just generally they hung on to it and have celebrated the other sovereigns since then in terms of their relationship to Victoria, which is a direct one. That's the whole point of having a monarchical sovereign. But Ricky points out, I like my sovereign, but she is 96 years old, the current sovereign. Her son is waiting in the wings, but he's not as well liked, though he hasn't had the opportunity, perhaps, that she has had to do his best to become better liked. And who knows, they may skip over him anyway. I did read the other day a very interesting take on a otherwise not particularly interesting article. I guess someone found it necessary to write an article. I think it was one of the Scottish newspapers was tweeting it around that apparently the current sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II, not the first one. I don't know how she felt about it, but Queen Elizabeth II apparently hates garlic and has forbidden it from whatever you would do with it. I guess could it really not be involved in any of the cooking at Buckingham Palace? At any rate, she's banned it from the palace, which I guess now includes Windsor Palace, where I understand she's removed to and is living there full time. But at any rate, I guess you can ban it from any number of palaces if you are the sovereign. And I guess British cookery, you can work around garlic. But I did see one particularly interesting observation, which was someone pointing out, I'm sure I can call that up so we can give proper credit to it and read it correctly. But that'll take a second. But let's see. I'm trying to remember the actual wording that they used to see if I can find it. There we are. Sophia McDougall reacting to the story from the Scottish Express explaining that Her Majesty has such a dislike for garlic that it is prohibited in the palace. And Sophia observing, wait, you're saying we live in a country ruled by an unnaturally long-lived aristocrat who lives in a castle and fears garlic? And that raises a lot of interesting possibilities. And that is, there's at least one other person then followed up by making the exact same joke. So that's interesting. And they're going to have a war over that in Scotland. Is the second person also Scottish? Can't tell. Anyway, good joke. Hopefully Sophia's version wasn't cribbed from someone else, so we would be justified in giving her the credit for that one. It's a good one. I wonder what the problem is. I know, of course, when we cook with garlic here, the whole house smells like garlic for a couple of days, which is pleasant enough when you're cooking it. And even if you like garlic, though, day 2, day 3, not so great. And imagine having the whole palace smell like that. Although, quite honestly, I would have to guess that those palaces smell anyway about something. Anyhow. All right. Well, what can you do? You live with it, right? Open the windows. Living in a palace can't be that bad. All right. That wasn't where I meant to spend any additional time, but it was a good comment. And Ricky also explains, by the way, that the reason that they start summer earlier is because their winters are longer, and I guess therefore they are more anxious to begin their summers. So, fine. I think that's a pretty good explanation. Let's see. Other stories. Really, is there any other story besides the Southern Baptist leaders? Yeah, as it turns out, there are. I'll share a couple of them with you that I have stored away. Starting not with the big story of the weekend, because you've probably already had time to digest that one, which was that Ginny Thomas is, as crazy as everybody says, and is on the record all over the place, emailing everyone. I think the big weekend story was her email exchanges with state legislators in Arizona, whom she was pressing vigorously to overturn the election results in that state, and then, hopefully, in her mind, starting the domino effect of overturning the electoral counts in other states and reinstating Donald Trump, yay, as loser president of the United States. But we should read through that and get some sense of what she's doing and when we might hear more about it, because there's a whole plan for all of the public hearings. And The Guardian, which isn't even an American newspaper, but I'm sure some other papers have done this. I just happened to settle on The Guardian via Twitter. They've got a whole article laying out what the schedule is going to be in case you want to schedule time to view the upcoming hearings. But first, Texas, the government of which totally sucks, has news for us that has, a lot to do with why it sucks and who the people are there who make it suck so badly. AP has this story by Paul J. Weber. I'm going to include the middle initial because he took the time to do it. Paul J. Weber and Jake Bleiberg. I'm guessing at that pronunciation it's Bleiberg. Here's the headline. 7 years later, still no trial for Texas AG Ken Paxton. How is it the case that an attorney general accused of serious felonies has avoided trial for 7 long years? And the answer is, I guess, because he's been attorney general the whole time and just says, I don't know, let's pull some strings and see if we can avoid it. Well, here's the news. 7 years old, but here it is. Not many people charged with felony crimes go 7 years without ever standing trial. One of them is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. The twists and turns of how the Republican, who is on the cusp of winning the GOP nomination, the GOP nomination, for a third term on Tuesday, he's obviously figured out, the only way I can stay out of jail is remain the Attorney General. Like Trump. Although Trump no longer remains president, and yet he's not in jail, so that we do have that problem. Anyway, Paxton has yet to have his day in court after being indicted on securities fraud charges in 2015. And his case has little comparison in American politics. Along the way, it has upended what it means to be a compromised office holder in Texas. That's an interesting way of putting it. 4 different judges have overseen his case at some point. Where a trial would happen, if it ever does, like actually where they would hold the trial, has ping-ponged from Dallas to Houston to Dallas again, probably Highland Park, if you think about it. All the while, other clouds have gathered over Paxton. The FBI is investigating him over separate accusations of corruption, and the State Bar of Texas is weighing possible reprimands over his attempts to baselessly overturn the 2020 election. And hardly ever mentioned anymore. But I think somewhere in Pocket, like Ancient Pocket, I had an article about him being caught on courthouse surveillance video stealing a very expensive Mont Blanc type fountain pen from some other attorney. Although I think what happened was that some other attorney took it out of his pocket to go through the metal detector and then neglected to collect it. But then Paxton went through and was like, "Oh, look at this pen, which I know is not mine. I think I'll take it." And I don't know what kind. I don't think it's federal felony charges you could file against him. But I thought that was one of the funnier examples of his personal petty corruption. Anyway, so where were we with this? Yes, also facing possible action by the State Bar of Texas over his attempts to overturn the election. Once, nearly a year passed with no movement in the case at all, that being the case against him for securities fraud from back in 2015. No single reason explains the delays, but altogether, Paxton has become an example of how powerful allies and acts of God can drag out career-threatening criminal charges and allow a politician to rise above being written off as a political goner. I mean, this one is crazy, said Andrew Wheat, a leader of the watchdog Texans for Public Justice. His group in 2014 filed a complaint with prosecutors over Paxton's failure to register as a securities advisor, one of the criminal charges the Republican is battling. Wheat is dubious that a trial will ever happen. And by the time it does, if it ever does, will it have any significance left to it, he said. If you can suspend the trial because something for all the time that the guy is in public office, and then when he finally loses or retires, you prosecute him for it, and he, takes some plea bargain, but has since spent, 8, 12 years as Attorney General of Texas. What's the point of prosecuting him at that point? Paxton, who faces 5 to 99 years in prison if convicted, it's not a small crime, right, has pleaded not guilty. His attorneys point out that Paxton invoked his right to a speedy trial and blame the holdup on special prosecutors who have spent years in a protracted battle over how much they're getting paid and whether the case should be tried. I don't know how much truth there is to that claim. How much the case matters is a question Texas Republicans have arguably already answered. Paxton was reelected in 2018 when the felony charges were still making front pages. He is now in reach of winning a nomination again on Tuesday in a runoff against Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush. So there's no good alternative in this race, who finished second in a 4-way primary in March, but still 20 percentage points behind Paxton. Bush, the son of former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, in case you were wondering which one he was from, and the last of his famous family still in office, has staked a comeback on TV ads that splash the indictments across the screen and call Paxton unfit for office, which is all true, of course. Paxton has mostly ignored the attacks while flaunting former President Donald Trump's endorsement. Most top Texas Republicans have been restrained in voicing any concerns, but a rare exception came just days ahead of the runoff when U.S. Senator John Cornyn called the unresolved case an embarrassment. Obviously, the voters will have access to that information, Cornyn said last week. They'll make their own decision, and I can't predict what the outcome will be. The indictments accuse Paxton of defrauding investors in a Dallas area tech startup, maybe Highland Park, I don't know, by not disclosing that he was being paid by the company, called Servergy, to recruit them. The indictments were handed up just months after Paxton was sworn in as Texas's top law enforcement officer. Not long after, allies of Paxton spearheaded attacks on special prosecutors' $300 hourly rate, calling it an abuse of taxpayer money. Local leaders in Paxton's hometown of Collin County, which is controlled by Republicans, agreed and voted to slash the pay. Since then, the criminal case has inched along. A court system brought to a standstill by a 2017 hurricane, and then the coronavirus pandemic slowed the pace even more. As it stands now, special prosecutors are waiting on Texas's top criminal court to rule on an appeal to address payment issues and keep Paxton's case in Houston. The trial's extended delay was in no way attributable to improper influence of Mr. Paxton, said Philip Hilder, one of Paxton's attorneys. That's why he thinks so, pointing the finger instead at prosecutors for challenging their pay and other pretrial rulings. In fact, Mr. Paxton invoked his right to a speedy trial. Mr. Paxton is innocent of these charges and sought to have his day in a proper court long ago, he said in a statement. In the intervening years, Paxton has drawn new scrutiny after I guess it really means his, but it has a T in there. So, new scrutiny after 8 of his top deputies accused him in 2020 of allegedly abusing his office to help a wealthy donor, Nate Paul, resist an earlier FBI investigation of the developer. Both federal probes continue, with investigators in recent months collecting Paul's business records and asking how the developer might have been paying Paxton, according to people familiar with the matter, who spoke on condition of anonymity because the investigation is ongoing. I don't know whether is Nate Paul any relation to Rand Paul and Ron Paul? I mean, Ron Paul's from Texas, right? And I know Rand has, of course, landed in Kentucky through whatever mechanism, but I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's a common enough surname. Just wondering. Doesn't say in here. Where were we? Oh, yes. Paul, whose lawyers did not respond to a request for comment, has denied bribing Paxton. That would be the wise thing to do, deny it. The Attorney General has broadly denied wrongdoing, and his lawyers declined to comment on the FBI investigation. In New Jersey, this is an interesting comparison, I guess. In New Jersey, a 2-year corruption indictment against U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat, ended with a hung jury in 2017. In Texas, attorneys and legal experts struggled to recall a case that has stretched as long as Paxton's without a resolution. They didn't do a really good job making a foundation for invoking Menendez's name in this article. They probably should have done better with that, and now it just looks like they're just throwing in the name of, well, there was once a Democrat who was indicted for something. Shouldn't we talk about that? All right. State Representative Gene Wu, a Democrat and attorney who spent 3 years as a prosecutor in Houston, described the delays as unheard of, saying even high-level cases in Texas's largest county go to trial in 2 to 3 years. There's a legitimate criminal violation, and justice is not being served because the people being charged have money and they have power. There is no time limit in which the charges against Paxton would expire, in case you were wondering about that. But as a practical matter, the courts are going to get concerned. People's memories fade and the like, said David Kwok, Kwok. I don't know how you pronounce that, but he's co-director of the Criminal Justice Institute at the University of Houston Law Center. The case hasn't outlasted Wheat's watchdog group, but they've scaled back. He says financial support for their nonprofit, which also filed the complaint that led to former Texas Governor Rick Perry's indictment in 2014, has been challenging in recent years. After being forced into a runoff, Paxton's campaign raised more than $2 million in about 3 months. So, by comparison, much more money, of course, flowing to him as a politician than to the watchdog group keeping him accountable. If you can even credit them with that, since the courts haven't begun on his case yet. I don't know. Seems pretty crazy. Anyway, like I said, how about some time on the Guardian's article telling us what to expect and when to expect it from the January 6th committee? The answer here is that the Capitol attack panel is to hold 6 public hearings as it aims to show how Trump broke the law. And we'll see whether that's worth anything. I'm starting to get nervous about it. But okay, here's what's reported here. And it's Hugo Lowell, who gets a lot of play on the show because he is, I guess, one of the chief U.S. correspondents, U.S.-based, D.C.-based correspondents for The Guardian. Let's see. Subheader again here. Panel aims to publicly outline the potentially unlawful, let's soft pedaling it, schemes that tried to keep the former president in office despite his defeat. We've been critiquing those of late. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol is expected to stage 6 public hearings in June on how Donald Trump and some allies broke the law as they sought to overturn the 2020 election results. According to sources familiar with the inquiry, the hearings are set to be a pivotal political moment, we hope anyway, for the country as the panel aims to publicly outline the potentially unlawful schemes that tried to keep the former president in office despite his defeat at the hands of Joe Biden. According to a draft schedule reviewed by The Guardian, the Select Committee intends to hold 6 hearings, with the first and last in prime time, where its lawyers will run through how Trump's schemes took shape before the election and culminated with the Capitol attack. I don't know whether they should do more of them, whether they think they were going to bore people if they did all 6 in prime time. But apparently the decision is the first and last in prime time. We want to paint a picture as clear as possible as to what occurred, the chairman of the Select Committee, Congressman Benny Thompson, recently told reporters. The public needs to know what to think. Okay, we just have to show clearly what happened on January 6th. The Select Committee has already alleged that Trump violated multiple federal laws to overturn the 2020 election, including obstructing Congress and defrauding the United States. But the hearings are where the panel intends to show how they reached those conclusions. According to the draft schedule, the June public hearings will explore Trump's efforts to overturn the election, starting and ending with primetime hearings at 8 p.m. on the 9th and the 23rd. In between, the panel will hold 10 a.m. hearings on the 13th, 15th, 16th, and 21st. So kind of waiting for the end of the month to wind things up. The Select Committee appears to be planning for the hearings to be extensive affairs. The primetime hearings are currently scheduled to last between 1.5 and 2 hours, and the morning hearings between 2 and 2.5 hours. That's not that extensive at all. But okay, a Select Committee member will lead each of the hearings, the sources said, but top investigative lawyers who are intimately familiar with the material will primarily conduct the questioning of witnesses to keep testimony tightly on track. As the witnesses, most of whom are being subpoenaed to appear at the hearings, give evidence that the panel believes will show how Trump and some allies violated the law, committee attorneys will simultaneously flash texts, photos, and videos to illustrate the testimony, the sources said. While the exact content and timings of the hearings are still subject to change, the sources said. The panel intends to lay out how the efforts to reverse Trump's defeat crystallized over a critical 65-day period from the time he falsely declared he won the 2020 election until January 6th. The Select Committee is expected, for instance, to run through how the Trump White House appeared to coordinate the illegal plan to send fake electors to Congress, the plot to seize voting machines, and the unlawful plan to delay the certification of Biden's win. The panel is also expected to chart the reactivation of the Stop the Steal movement by the Trump activist Ali Alexander and associates, and how he applied for a permit to protest near the Capitol on January 6th, but never held the, quote, wild protest, and instead went up the Capitol steps. The Select Committee additionally intends to address the question of intent, such as why Trump deliberately misled the crowd that he would march with them on to the Capitol, and why he resisted entreaties to call off the rioters from obstructing the joint session on January 6th. The president's rhetoric persuaded thousands of Americans to travel to Washington for January 6th, some of whom marched on the Capitol, breached security, and took other illegal actions. The panel said in a March court filing, hearings will address those issues in detail. Capping off the 6 hearings under the current schedule, the sources said, will be a close examination of the video footage of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys militia group leaders meeting in a parking garage the day before the deadly riots and their movements at the Capitol. That final hearing is notable, the sources said, because the Select Committee is attempting to connect Trump's political plan for January 6th and the militia group's violence at the Capitol in what could form evidence that Trump oversaw an unlawful conspiracy. The video footage of the militia group leaders at a rendezvous the day before the Capitol attack that the Select Committee intends to review has also already been referenced in seditious conspiracy indictments, including against the Oath Keepers chief, Stuart Rhodes. The way that the Select Committee packages and presents each of the hearings isn't yet final. For example, the final session about the militia groups planning and executing the Capitol attack could be moved around to become the first of the 6 hearings, the sources said. But the panel's attorneys have been told which hearings they will lead. Sean Tonoli, who led the inquiry into the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, will be chief counsel for the militia hearings, supported by Gold Team counsel Alejandra Apacechia, I'm not certain how that's pronounced, Apacechia perhaps, and others, Apecechea. Make your best guess tomorrow on the show. The Purple Team, that's an interesting accompaniment to the Gold Team. The Purple Team is focused on the militia groups, while the Gold Team has examined Trump's efforts to overturn the election. Okay. The Red Team has looked at Stop the Steal. The Green Team at the financing for January 6th. That makes some sense. And the Blue Team at the government response. So it's all the responsibilities are broken out nicely. And we'll see how well they coordinate and what kind of case they make beginning on June 9th, which is not so far away, but I guess winding up at the end of June. I hope they can sustain interest throughout the entire month. Hopefully it's not that difficult. All right, but at any rate, we'll wait and see how they do with that one. Okay, let's see. Any other items that need recovery from any of the other input systems besides Pocket? Oh, okay. I forgot to check in with the coronavirus news from the tracker in my email from the New York Times. And yes, we were up and over the 200 mark in terms of the average number of new cases in Loudoun County over the past 7 days. So it was a big deal when we passed 100, and we've since doubled that. So that's something to look out for. Oh, yes. And in fact, well, maybe we'll wait for another day to announce the news there, but some interesting developments, politically speaking, in the area. So we can make national news of Loudoun County once again. Let's see. Other stories to share. Oh, yes, this was of some interest. I noticed this one this morning. Maybe we can just sneak it in before the exit for the next break. Stephen Portnoy, CBS News Radio White House correspondent, tweets this from the early morning hours today. The new news here being that the Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida, I've not kept up with who's the Prime Minister of Japan, but he has, and it's professionally in his interest to do so. But Japanese Prime Minister Kishida says Biden has agreed that Japan should become a permanent member of a, quote, reformed UN Security Council. That's something of interest to us on the show. We've been talking occasionally about how odd it is that Russia should have inherited, I mean, it wouldn't appear odd until recently, that they should have inherited that seat. I wonder if it'll be a swap out for Japan or just an expansion. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see what we might add to the mix for today. Sort of glancing through some of the older things, and yet there's plenty that's new, of course, and in fact it would probably be in keeping with the theme to check in on this thing that I had to retweet over the weekend from Hamza Shaban, a business reporter at the Washington Post, but here's the business he's dealing with at the moment. He's taking note of the work published at the New York Times, how Trump's 2020 election lies have gripped state legislatures, and his takeaway from it, tweeted yesterday, at least 357, that's a large number, 357 sitting Republican legislators in battleground states have used the power of their office to discredit or try to overturn the 2020 presidential elections, according to a review of legislative votes, records, and official statements by the New York Times. Here is that official record that they have created. How Trump's 2020 election lies have gripped state legislatures, and it's illustrated up at the top of the little chart here. The percentage of Republican state legislators that took steps to discredit or overturn the 2020 presidential election results in 6 key states here. The least number being in Nevada, where 4% of Republican state legislators took such steps, ranging all the way up in Arizona to 81%, where coincidentally, but not actually coincidentally, actually quite directly related, Ginny Thomas was focusing her efforts early on from the other big article of the weekend, and maybe those two need to be read and discussed together. Nick Corasaniti, I thought I was going to say Corasanti, but it's Corasaniti is what it's spelled like. Karen Yorish and Keith Collins on the byline for this piece from the New York Times. Dateline Lansing, Michigan. This is a good follow-up to our discussion at the end of last week of how many places we were finding activity by elections officials breaking into their own computerized voting equipment in an attempt, of course, they would tell you, to safeguard it, which seems unlikely, to say the least. let's see, at least 357 sitting Republican legislators in closely contested battleground states have used the power of their office to discredit or try to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election, according to this review conducted by the New York Times. The tally accounts for 44% of the Republican legislators in the 9 states. That's I mentioned 6, but apparently across 9 states, 44% of their Republican legislators have become involved. In each of those states, the election was conducted without any evidence of widespread fraud, leaving election officials from both parties in agreement on the victory of Joseph R. Biden Jr., in case you didn't know his full name. The Times analysis exposes how deeply rooted lies and misinformation about former President Donald J. Trump's defeat have become in state legislatures, which play an integral role in U.S. democracy, as it turns out. Bet you didn't know that. In some, the false view that the election was stolen, either by fraud or as a result of pandemic-related changes to the process, or in some cases they claim the same things are both, is now widely accepted as fact among Republican lawmakers, turning state houses into hotbeds of conspiratorial thinking and specious legal theories. 357 of these lawmakers took concrete steps to discredit or overturn the election results. That amounts to 44% of the Republicans in those states, and here are the 9 illustrated in this chart. We mentioned Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada are those swing states that Biden won in 2020. There are, of course, a few swing states that Trump won in 2020 where there has likewise been a lot of similar activity. North Carolina, Texas, and Florida. 23% of Republican legislators in these states took steps to delay the vote count or overturn the election by supporting lawsuits or signing letters to Congress or former Vice President Mike Pence. 11% supported sending alternate slates of electors to Congress that would override the choices of voters in those states. 7% supported a legally dubious theory of decertification of the 2020 election, which legal experts say has no basis in U.S. election law. Speaking to that point briefly, if we don't get around to Ginny Thomas, she was a big believer in that, and essentially, I guess, insinuated that her husband was as well. And he is, but that he might rule in their favor were they to bring such a case. But yes, their novel interpretation of a novel theory, the theory being going under the name of the independent legislatures theory, but they've taken this much further. We've discussed it on the show in the past, that essentially it's their theory that state legislators have as many bites at the apple as they want and whenever they want them in terms of determining who the state's representatives to the Electoral College will be. The fact that they elected to go with, or I guess I should say chose to go with elections to determine who the electors for these various states would be is apparently of no importance to them if the election comes out the way in a way they disapprove of, either by electing the wrong person in their view or by even electing the right person, but something that they don't like about the way it came out means that they should be able to just select the electors. We'll tell everybody we're going to have an election and then just ignore the election and appoint our own electors over and above that. And it doesn't matter whether it happens before the election, after the election, right after the election, connected with anything in particular. They just feel like they have the plenary power to undo all of it, ignore the results of the election, and appoint their own electors. That is a novel view of an already dubious proposition that the state legislatures really do have this plenary power to do these things whenever they want to. I don't think anybody really contests that they can make these decisions ahead of the elections, and they can opt to abandon using elections to select their electors. But once you make the decision to go ahead and do that, That's probably binding. And then, of course, once you actually hold the election, that should probably be viewed as doubly binding. And even if you get to a point where you think that you can prove that the election went off in a way that renders it invalid, I think you're still committed to having an election to determine who your electors will be, even if it's late in the game. But they bypass that and they say, it doesn't matter that we said we were going to have an election. We had one and it didn't work so well, so we're just not going to have them anymore, or at least not this time. That seems to be their plan. Anybody can do that, by the way. If you wanted to float a ridiculous notion, it's just a matter of can you talk people into taking it seriously, even if it's only 7% of the people you're speaking to. Is that enough? One of the things you might want to discuss in this vein is, hey, how do you get rid of Clarence Thomas, say, from the Supreme Court? Most people think, because they've read the Constitution, that the only way you can get a Supreme Court justice removed from office is to impeach him. And that would mean, of course, a majority in the House voting to impeach him. And then to remove him from office would require the conviction in the Senate, a 2/3 vote in the Senate to remove him from office. That's the way we've been operating. But hey, what if there was a novel thing called the independent legislature theory that said that the United States federal legislature is independent from all of this stuff, and let's say they could just, as an act of Congress, declare this particular seat on the Supreme Court to be vacant. We're not impeaching you. We're not removing you from office through the impeachment. We're just saying there's nobody in this seat anymore. As an act of Congress, we declare this to be true. By statute, this seat is now empty. Just happens to be the one that Clarence Thomas is sitting in, but this seat is now empty as a matter of law, and we also, by the way, maybe in the same act of Congress, you want to strip the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to review such a law. You can do that. You can do that. It's a novel theory. People would say, but that's unconstitutional. And you would say, I guess it could be. We'll have to take it up and ask some questions about this thing. But so is the independent legislature theory and the particularly pernicious version of it that says that state legislatures can just change their mind at any point and redo the whole thing, election or otherwise. That's novel. I mean, it stands on ground as firm as Ginny Thomas's idea about what the legislatures ought to be doing about their electors as well. I'll have to see if I can fix I don't know how that happened, because I turned up the volume on the phone that's supposed to be for the rest of the programming is no good on that anymore. Anyway, too bad. Where were we? Oh, yes, we were still reading through the rest of this New York Times article. First, 24% of the Republican lawmakers voted for an outside partisan review of the 2020 election, often referred to as a, quote, audit, like they did in Arizona. The reviews have been used to justify new voting laws and efforts to decertify the 2020 election. Legislators in Florida and North Carolina did not face as much pressure to overturn the election because Trump carried both states. In Nevada, Democrats controlled the legislature. And though the state Republican Party pushed for alternative electors, no legislators took any action. So that explains the lower numbers in Nevada and in Florida. These fictions about rigged elections and widespread fraud have provided the foundation for new laws that make it harder to vote and easier to insert partisanship in the vote count. By the way, apparently fact checker Glenn Kessler over at the Washington Post doesn't buy this idea, by the way, this one, that the fictions about rigged elections and widespread fraud have provided the foundation for new laws that make it harder to vote and easier to insert partisanship in the vote count. Now, we've been watching that happen in real time. Many people have for the last year or so. But I found it of some interest that that happened yesterday, too. Where was it? See if I can find it. Somebody else taking exception with that. Yes, Glenn Kessler tweeting on Saturday. Voting is surging in Georgia despite Democratic claims that a new election law would make it harder to cast a ballot. He's reporting the Washington Post work of Amy Gardner and who is this? Well, I don't know. I'll check in, open it up, and take a look at the article so that we know who we're talking about here. Matthew Brown. Voting is surging in Georgia despite controversial new election law. Kessler, I guess, I don't know whether he's taking their conclusion or drawing his own conclusion, that this somehow means that all the Democratic claims about people making it harder to vote in Georgia were wrong. However, Dan Pfeiffer, pointing out from his perch as co-host of Pod Save America, that people climbing over barriers is not evidence that the barriers weren't built, and in fact built to keep them out. But that's a good point. Can it be the case that voting is harder and yet more people are doing it? Yes, it would just mean that more people are doing more work than ever before in order to cast their ballots, which is testament to their determination, not evidence that there either are no barriers or that the barriers that are there weren't built in the hopes that they would not do that. It's a poor conclusion for Kessler, and well done to Dan Pfeiffer for pointing it out. Anyway, back to whatever the hell we were doing. All right, the New York Times article. Why is that not still open? There it is. Okay. So we left off right when we were reminded to point that fact out. These fictions about rigged elections have provided the foundation for new laws that do, in fact, make it harder to vote, even though more people are voting anyway. In 3 states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, state lawmakers successfully pushed for investigations that sowed doubt about the results and tested the boundaries of their oversight. Wisconsin, a particularly egregious example. And Arizona, too, which we're forgetting about, of course, them and the stupid Cyber Ninjas audit, which is among the dumbest, episodes of American democracy ever. And yet, the Times' analysis also shows that these efforts have encountered significant resistance from key Republican figures, which is supposed to be nice and perhaps a redeeming factor here, as well as Democrats, except it's been across the board, I think, from Democrats and rare from Republicans. In most states, the lawmakers who challenge the 2020 results do not have the numbers or the support of governors, secretaries of state, or legislative leaders to achieve their most audacious aims. They have advanced but not enacted legislation that would make it easier for politicians to overturn elections. And it is only a minority of Republican lawmakers who promote the legally dubious view that they, and not the votes of the people, can select the electors who formally cast a ballot for the president in the Electoral College. Election and democracy experts say they see the rise of anti-democratic impulses in state houses as a clear new threat to the health of American democracy. State legislatures hold a unique position in the country's democratic apparatus, wielding a constitutionally mandated power to set the, quote, times, places, and manner of holding elections, unquote. Cheered on by Mr. Trump as he eyes another run for the White House in 2024, many state legislators have shown that they see that power as license to exert greater control over the outcome of elections. In an interview with the Times, Mr. Trump acknowledged that in deciding whom to endorse in state legislative races, he is looking for candidates who want state legislatures to have a say in naming presidential electors, a position that could let politicians short-circuit the democratic process and override the popular vote. In 2020, the plan of Trump and his allies hinged ultimately on getting state legislatures to overturn the will of the voters, said Ben Berwick, a counsel at Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan group. If passed as prologue, that same strategy is likely to be central to efforts to subvert an election in the future. Then a little infographic here of some sort that says, purports to explain what state legislatures can attempt before an election, with 3 different claims being made and each, several claims being made on several questions, and each one, the answers are designated as either having clear legal authority for them, or legally disputed, or are legally implausible. Now, what can states do before an election? They can pass laws that make voting harder, that they've got clear authority for. They can pass laws that give them more power over elections. That too is clearly within their authority. Disputed, they can pass laws, they say, that make overturning elections easier. But I don't think that's actually very much disputed. But I'm glad that it is. I'm glad that it's designated that way. What can they attempt after an election? Well, there's less clear legal authority there. Among the few things that they can do, launch audits and investigations, but it is legally disputed as to whether they can either attempt to delay certification or vote to send alternative electors. That I would have put as legally implausible, if you ask me. What they can attempt after an election has been certified, well, they can launch audits and investigations still, but the one thing designated as legally implausible here, attempt to decertify the election. Now back to the body of the article. The Times' review provides only a glimpse of the ways that state legislatures fueled the movement to deny and challenge the 2020 results. The analysis focused on concrete actions and did not include lawmakers' posts on social media or statements that they made in campaign speeches. Some legislators who were among the most vociferous in their support of subverting the election have tried to use their 2020 efforts as a springboard to higher office, all while still pledging to further remove Democratic guardrails, which of course would probably make it easier for them to assume those offices. Doug Mastriano, the Republican state senator from Pennsylvania who won his party's nomination for governor last Tuesday, has pushed the Justice Department to investigate debunked election conspiracies, held a legislative hearing with members of Mr. Trump's legal team, and promised to enact new voting restrictions if elected. Mark Fincham, a Republican state representative in Arizona who has pursued the dubious theory of election decertification, is a candidate for Secretary of State in Arizona. Trump's defeat was undisputed among elections officials and certified by Democratic and Republican secretaries of state, with slates of electors signed by Democratic and Republican governors. None of the many recounts or audits altered the outcome. Trump's Department of Justice found no evidence of widespread fraud, and Trump lost more than 50 of his post-election challenges in court. You might even say more than 60, because that's the actual number, as I understand it. His campaign to overturn the defeat played out differently across the states. Trump won Florida and had no reason to pressure lawmakers to agitate over the result, though they used the distrust in the election as justification for new voting restrictions. But in Texas, another state Trump won, the deeply conservative legislature was eager to show voters that it was taking action, and lawmakers introduced a bill that included provisions to overturn results in future elections. In Nevada, Mr. Trump lost by more than 33,000 votes, but with Democrats in control of the House, Senate, and governor's office, Republicans in the state legislature showed little interest in joining efforts by the Nevada Republican Party to send an alternate slate of electors after the 2020 election. Nevada is the only one of the 9 battleground states where Democrats control the legislature. Lastly, I guess here, our next section anyway, a call for action 4 days before the House of Representatives was set to formally tally the Electoral College votes for Mr. Biden, an act long considered purely ceremonial. Trump's advisors gathered more than 300 state legislators on a Zoom call, according to a report by the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The former president and his allies pushed for lawmakers to change the certified results sent to Congress. Many experts said such a move would have been unconstitutional. Peter Navarro, a former top White House advisor, told those in the group that it was their responsibility to act, describing the situation as dire. Trump told them the legislatures were the linchpin in his strategy, more important than the courts or Congress. According to the report, the argument was based on the independent state legislature theory, which asserts that state legislatures hold absolute and exclusive power over presidential elections, including the appointment of electors to the Electoral College. The idea is purely theoretical. It's never been affirmed by a court decision, and most scholars say it has no merit. Of course, until you get 5 justices to say it does. Days after Trump spoke to lawmakers, members of the Pennsylvania state legislature wrote a letter to Senator Mitch McConnell, then the Senate Majority Leader, and Representative Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader in the House, asking them to delay certification. On January 5th, more than 90 legislators from Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania sent a letter to Vice President Pence asking him to delay the certification of the election. Trump has continued to try to convince state legislatures that they can decertify the 2020 election, a process that has no basis in either the Constitution of the United States or state constitutions. State lawmakers have responded to Trump's calls for action largely by overhauling voting procedures. A total of 34 laws that include restrictions on voting were passed in 2021, according to a review by The Times, and 18 laws were passed this year, according to a report from the States United Democracy Center, a nonprofit group. Some limited drop boxes or mail-in voting. Others put more power over elections in the hands of state legislatures rather than local elections officials or secretaries of state. Some bills also sought to make it easier for lawmakers to intervene in elections. An early draft of a sweeping Texas election law included a subsection titled Overturning Elections, though that provision was dropped before the bill's final passage. In Arkansas, Republicans granted the State Board of Election Commissioners new powers to take, quote, corrective action or open investigations at every stage of the voting process. Arkansas state legislators were not included in the Times analysis because Trump won the state handily. In many states, lawmakers' first step has been to call for outside partisan investigations, often referred to as audits, in quotes, although they do not follow typical auditing procedures or standards. Next section here is audits as a gateway. The hunt for fraud in Arizona accelerated in the days after electors had been certified and showed how a vocal and determined faction of Republican legislators could force through a deeply destabilizing outside election review. The initial pursuit of fraud would devolve into a year-long fracas between Republicans and local elections officials in Maricopa County, home to Phoenix. The Republican Senate hired a shadowy outside firm with ties to election conspiracy theories to conduct a, quote, audit, dismissing objections from Republican county officials. What the, quote, audit eventually found, that Biden had indeed won Arizona, proved irrelevant to those who had called for it. Trump and his allies focused instead on perceived irregularities in the voting process, such as 23,344 mail-in ballots sent from voters' prior addresses and election management databases that were purged. Both practices are legal and common. Local elections officials found 76 misleading, inaccurate, or false claims in the audit report. Yet many of those claims appeared verbatim in a resolution introduced in February by Mr. Fincham, the Arizona state representative, and sponsored by 13 fellow Republicans in the legislature. The resolution calls for decertifying, in quotes, the election. In announcing the resolution, Fincham made reference to the independent state legislature theory as his justification. While some may say there is no valid constitutional or statutory grounds for such an action, they clearly are disregarding long-standing jurisprudence, of which there's none. Mr. Fincham wrote in an announcement accompanying the resolution, "The path from the review to the resolution shows how outside investigations can create pressure for further action." Republican leaders in the Arizona legislature haven't taken up Fincham's measure. Russell Bowers, the Speaker of the Arizona House and a Republican, said that the state legislature could only appoint its own electors if, quote, there was proven demonstrable fraud sufficient to cover whatever balance or gap in voters that existed. He added, "We did not even come close to that," and he dismissed the Senate review as a seat-of-the-pants circus. Still, I would say he even goes too far. Frankly, I would say the state legislature can only appoint its own electors if they do so ahead of time and overtly instead of holding an election, or possibly if there's some major event that makes it impossible to hold the election or consider it to be valid. In his mind, that's some kind of sort of fraud. I'm thinking like meteor strikes the earth is really, and even then, it's not entirely clear. That's just, you had an election, and there wasn't much in the way of turnout. Can't really help you beyond that. Anyway, Republican leaders in other battleground states are facing similar upheavals surrounding so-called audit efforts. In Wisconsin, Robin Vos, the Republican Speaker of the House, at first resisted launching an outside, quote, forensic audit, but after public pressure from Trump, he relented and created a review helmed by Michael Gableman, former state Supreme Court justice, and we've read about what a disaster that has been. Gableman quickly took the investigation in a different direction. When he released an initial report of his findings in March, Gableman argued for decertification. One state representative, Timothy Ramthun, has put the call to decertify at the center of his campaign for governor. Well, we can't make it through all the way to the end here. There's one last section, remaking legislatures in the next election. But you could probably guess what that's about. If you can't, maybe Justice Putnam will tell you about it on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Many other things he's got in mind for discussion, including the first shipment of baby formula arriving in Indianapolis from Germany on Sunday, as well as a government report which found that Trump's census plot to game apportionment might have actually cost red states scores of seats. Wouldn't that be fantastic? He has got to make great deals, and he has yet to make any, as far as I can tell.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Here's a fun one, a bit of a throwback. The top elected GOP official in a rural and sparsely populated West Texas county has been arrested. That's not unusual or new, but he's been arrested for cattle rustling. That's some serious old school crime. Good for you, GOP. Way to go.